The next paper, paper 8, is going to be taken by the Deputy Provost.
Thank you, Provost. And can I introduce paper 8, the financial strategy, and I would invite the Head of Finance, Kenzie, to introduce this paper. You're mute, Stuart.
Apologies, Deputy Provost. Beginner's error here. Can I just check that members in the chamber and online can hear me? Okay, I'll proceed on that basis. Thank you. And good afternoon, councillors. This report provides a high-level commentary on the financial challenges facing the council and a financial strategy aimed at ensuring the council moves to a financially sustainable position. As with all public sector bodies, the council faces financial pressures from significant increases in costs, growing demand for services, apologies, I'll continue, and constraints on its funding and income. There are risks in the current year which could impact upon the council's financial position going forward, and members will be familiar with concerns over contract, energy price and fuel inflation, and public sector pay. The recently published Resource Spending Review outlines the Scottish Government's revenue spending plans until the end of the parliamentary session. Revenue funding for local government is forecast to be cash flat, which, given current levels of inflation, represents a reduction in real terms over the period to 2026-27. As detailed budgets will continue to be set annually, the Council is not expecting to be advised of its provisional Scottish Government funding allocation for next year until December, and I'll provide an update at that point. The Council has an underlying structural deficit of £10 million, which is being met from reserves in the current year. The use of non-recurring funding to meet recurring expenditure has become common across Scottish local authorities, but is by definition not sustainable. It is therefore essential that the Council move to a position of funding its ongoing expenditure on a sustainable basis to protect the future delivery of Council services, and the financial strategy is predicated upon taking the necessary corrective action to achieve this. As elected members have previously been advised, the scale of the financial challenge potentially facing the Council next year is currently estimated at approximately £24 million. This represents the gap between our forecast expenditure and income. The £24 million budget gap in 2023-24 remains an estimate, which will be updated in view of ongoing cost inflation, Scottish Government funding, and the outcome of national negotiations on pay awards, amongst other factors. Equally, the estimate of £61 million of future revenue budget pressures through to 2027-28 contained in the latest update to the medium-term financial plan will require to be revisited upwards. Whilst the Council has a track record of identifying and delivering savings through transformation and efficiency, this position is unprecedented. The financial strategy is therefore aimed at ensuring the Council has a resilient and sustainable medium-term financial plan based upon the overarching aim of directing resources to where they are most needed, in line with the Council's agreed priorities. Section 3 of the strategy sets out principles to help shape and inform the Council's budget decision making, while Section 4 outlines the strategic tools and levers available to the Council in managing its financial position and achieving financial sustainability. The Transformation and Change Strategy is one of a range of strategic approaches which will guide and support the necessary reshaping of Council services. Budget cuts and service reductions will, however, inevitably be required, particularly over the first few years, to support the Council achieve a more sustainable financial position. As part of its approach, it is recommended that the Council build up and apply reserves on a managed and non-recurring basis to help to smooth the impact of budget decisions on service delivery. This will not avoid having to make cuts, but will avoid having to potentially implement £24 million or more of budget cuts in a single year. It is proposed that this approach commence immediately through managing down expenditure in the current financial year as far as possible. To conclude, the financial strategy is intentionally framed as a strategic document based upon high-level principles and the adoption of a long-term approach to financial resilience. A more detailed analysis of the Council's forecast budget position will be submitted in the autumn as part of the annual update of the medium-term financial plan. In updating the plan, I propose to include a recommendation to return to multi-year budgeting from 2023-24 onwards. This is consistent with the Council's previous approach of agreeing rolling 3-year revenue budgets and the aims of the strategy in promoting financial sustainability. Happy to take questions, Deputy Provost.
Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie. Before I move to questions, I'll just say, please remember that we should be in part 2 of the chat. At the moment, I only have a question from Councillor Robertson. I'm looking forward to other questions coming up in the chat. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost, and thank you, Mr. Mackenzie. I always look, when Mr. Mackenzie speaks, I always think he's going to tell me good news, but I've never actually heard him speak and give me good news. Based on this very worrying report that's come before us today, could we have a capital budget, it says, going forward in 4.3 of £730 million? Would his advice to us be to look at that capital budget and perhaps look at how that can be trimmed? Because with inflation running at 10–11%, it's likely that capital budget, the costs in that capital budget will continue to grow far faster than we can actually find the money to keep up with it. What would his recommendations be, please?
Thank you, Deputy Provost, and thank you, Councillor Robertson. I endeavour at some point in my career to bring you some good news. I'm sure I'll be able to manage that over the course of the next 12 months if I'm making no firm commitment on that. It is a challenging position, and my advice to elected members, both in capital and revenue, will be to review all existing spending proposals. And we have a transformation and change strategy before us in the next paper, which looks at that very thing. In terms of capital, we have a funded capital position, but we are experiencing significant pressures on that because of contract inflation. So I think, as with everything within the Council's budget, be it revenue or capital, we just need to keep that under review, and elected members will determine priorities in accordance with the resources we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. My question is about section 7.6 of the report, where we're told that over the last 5 years, £39 million worth of savings and income proposals have been brought forward, and of that total, 6.5 million have been rejected by the council. My question is, if the same saving was brought forward but rejected by the council on multiple occasions, then is it accounted for just once in the 16.5 million that's been rejected, or is it counted for multiple times? So I'm thinking, for example, it's a relatively small number, but something like the school crossing patroller number or the swimming lesson reduction number, I remember has come forward, have been rejected multiple times. Is that in the 16.5 million one time over or multiple times over? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, and thank you for the advance notice of the question. It's accounted for multiple times because what we've done is we've effectively taken the total each year of the savings proposals, recognising that officer recommendations may not have been accepted in a given year by elected members, but might have been reviewed in the following year. So it's counted multiple times if we take that example.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Barrett now.
Thank you. COSLA leaders offered the unions a 5% pay increase contingent on getting additional support, financial support from the Scottish Government on Friday. The Scottish Government immediately dismissed that and That's despite them setting the bar for public sector pay increases at 5% for both health and the railway unions, ASLEF. If they maintain that position, Stuart, can you tell us, what is the impact going to be on the scale of the challenge and the structural deficit that we face next year, which is down as 24 million, but in my reckoning could rise to 30 or more than 30 million. And what would be the impact on any 5% pay increase agreed for this year that doesn't receive any government financial contribution towards?
Thanks for your question, Councillor Barrett. I'll maybe break that down into its component parts. So we have a provision for 2.5% for pay awards in the current year, and each 1% is about £2.1 million or thereabouts. So if the council were to agree to a 5% pay award, roughly speaking, that would be an additional £5.5 million. Whether that's funded or not, as I understand, subject to ongoing discussions between COSLA and the Scottish Government, and I don't know if those have concluded or not. So that would be another £5.5 million, thereabouts, of pressure in the current year. That would roll forward into the base budget for next year, so the £24 million would increase. In terms of the £24 million, we've included 2% for pay awards in that estimate, and as I said, it is only an estimate, based on the budgeting assumptions of around about 2/3 of local authorities who've also included 2% going forward on the basis of affordability. So around 50% of our gross expenditure relates to staff costs, so any movement in pay awards has a significant impact on the council's budget position.
So just for clarity, Stuart, it's 5.5 million this year, and is it more than 5.5 million next year because of the assumptions made, and also there'll be next year's pay agreement anyway?
Yeah, it's roughly a little bit under 5.5 million, but roughly £5.5 million in the current year. If we were to go to 5%, and that wasn't to be funded, and as I say, that's still subject to discussion, and then that would impact on rolling forward because it increases the base, on which we would then be applying a percentage uplift next year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. I have a question, and I suspect I may have a follow-up as well. Stuart, I'm interested in ring-fenced money that we get from the Scottish Government. Can you give me an outline of how much of our budget is ring-fenced and what the change in that amount has been over the last few years?
Thank you,
I think you're on mute.
Apologies, can you hear me? Thanks,
yes, I can. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Forbes, your question. Again, thank you for advance notice. I don't have current figures for Perth and Kinross Council per se, but what we did do in preparing the revenue budget report, which Council considered in February, in setting this year's budget, is quote some analysis or reference some analysis by the Scottish Parliament Information Centre, which has been undertaken at a national level. And they looked at 5 years of the overall grant funding allocation to local government. And in 2018-19, around about 4% of resources were ring-fenced or otherwise directed, because it's not specifically ring-fenced, there's other mechanisms which the Scottish Government have used to align their resourcing with their policy objectives. So that 4% in 18-19 grew to 17.9% by Spice's estimate for 22-23. What I would say, well, to put that into some sort of context, is there's a lot of new money come in for Scottish Government policy initiatives. I'm thinking about early learning and childcare. I'm thinking about free school meals. I'm thinking about free music tuition. So you would expect, if that money is tied to those directives, for the percentage to increase over time. So there is an explanation for that in terms of the funding, but the level of money which is directed by the Scottish Government towards policy objectives as a percentage does increase over time.
Thanks, Stuart. Just a quick follow-up to that then. So the Scottish Government...
Sorry, Councillor Forbes.
Yeah, of course.
Asking Councillor Colin Stewart to come back for his second in due course. Can I ask you to come back for your second in due course too?
I am happy to do that, Deputy Provost. It is a direct follow-up to what Stuart has just told me. It's not a separate question, but I'll go with whatever you decide.
If it's a direct follow-up, please go on.
Okay, thank you. Stuart, just so I can get my head round how this works, we know that the Scottish Government have committed to fund, just as an example, the renewal of every play park across Scotland. So that money will come to Perth and Kinross at some point, I presume. Would that be, have you included that money? Because we're told it's going to be, well, 12 million by my estimate to Perth and Kinross. Have you included that in, for example, or is it only money that we've actually got in now?
So the figures I'm quoting are national figures. They're not specific.
Okay, of course.
Cost. Yep.
Okay.
But that would be built in. But as I think the point I'm trying to make is you would expect that percentage to increase as more money is built into the settlement for specific activities. So there's a kind of combination of effect which reflects the growth. One, there's been a growth in the direction of funding, but there's also been a growth in the amount of money allocated for specific policy initiatives, which are agreed with COSLA. I would say that. So we have national initiatives, and that's what's growing the percentage over time.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I now come to Councillor Grant Stewart?
Hello, Stuart. Can I ask if you could outline the impact higher fuel prices are having on the council? And in your modelling, do you anticipate the prices to continue to rise?
Thank you, Councillor Stewart, for your question. I don't have the specific figures for what we're working with for fuel inflation. Maybe perhaps colleagues can fill that in. But to give you a sense of how that might impact in costs, we are quoting a figure roughly of £5 million for the impact of inflation as part of the estimate for 23-24. Around about £300,000 of that is school transport alone, largely driven by increases in fuel costs. But we're seeing that in the cost of materials for our infrastructure projects. We're seeing that in the cost of maintenance projects as well. In terms of inflation, members will be aware that the May statistics were released by the Office of National Statistics this morning. CPI now stands at 9.1%. RPI, which governs a lot of our contracts, 11.7. So the general trend appears to be for inflation to be continuing to rise in the current year, possibly peaking towards the end of the year. That's at least the projection from the Bank of England, and then smoothing down over the next 2 years. But that's one of the key questions that we explore in the covering report to the Strategy Councillor Stewart, is just how sticky, for want of a better word, some of this inflation is going to be, just how continuing it's going to be. And I think we need to do further work on that for one specific circumstance. Hope that addresses the question.
Can I ask Fraser Croft to come in? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Just for context, our operations division spend around about £1 million a year for fuel costs. So clearly, with recent price rises, that could, if that continues, that could be in the region of, certainly running into tens of thousands, if not hundreds of £1,000s more, if the baseline continues.
Thank you. And I now call Councillor Colin Stewart for your first question. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Councillor Bailey nabbed my first question on 7.6, but just to follow that up, what is the quantum of the £16.5 million of rejected savings proposals that is double, triple or quadruple counted?
I don't have that information to hand, Councillor Stewart. I don't think it would be necessarily a huge number, although there have been, as members will be aware, there's been savings proposals put forward by officers because they're non-statutory functions, and that's tended to be what's driven it, because they are non-statutory functions, which have been rejected by elected members over a period of time. But I don't have that figure to hand. We can do the analysis and give you that figure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Mr Mackenzie, I very much appreciate that the forecasts that we're looking at today are our best endeavours, and that we are at the mercy of economic factors and decisions by our national and UK government. But we're looking at a figure of a 24 million projected structural financial deficit for 23-24. This is around 5.5% of this year's £430 million general fund revenue budget. I wonder, do officers have a feel for where that level of financial shortfall, 5.5%, sits compared with other Scottish local authorities?
Thank you, Councillor Drysdale, for your question. There's usually a little bit of background intelligence gathering, as you might expect. That hasn't been undertaken at this point in the year. I know that national work is going to commence looking at inflationary pressures, because this is common to us all. But I wouldn't be surprised if we were seeing that level of financial challenge across most local authorities in Scotland. Some will be in a better place, some will be in a worse place, but that's probably maybe a reasonable indication of where most local authorities are going to be. I don't think we are an outlier in any way.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now come to Councillor Duff. Thereafter, I have Councillor Liz Barrett, and then we move to Councillor Colin Stewart's second question. I'd ask for any last questions in the chat now, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. My question is in relation to section 5.4 in the report, which talks about the Scottish Government settlements for the 5 years starting from next year onward. And my question for Mr Mackenzie is, how does that compare to what the local government settlement was for 2022-23? I don't know if you know the total figure, comparison figure.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. You've kind of caught me with that question. I don't have the total figure, because these are the aggregate figures. I don't have that total figure to hand. We can source that for you. What I can say is that in terms of our financial settlement from the Scottish Government for 22-23, it was fairly cash flat. Sorry, it was effectively cash flat. The £120 million was added, members may recall, £120 million was added to the local government settlement towards the end of the process last year. That has been baselined in the 23-24 figures. So they include the £120 million on a recurring basis. So that's one recurring uplift, but I don't have that figure to hand. Apologies. We will source that for you.
Yes, apologies. I should have prepared you for the question. My fault. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Liz Barrett.
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart, for your paper. In 3.4, we welcome the strategic priorities and objectives and focus. On point 4, number 3, prioritise the delivery of services which we must provide by law. Can you just clarify if that includes the actions that we have to take regarding our obligations to tackle the climate emergency?
Yes, I mean, I think thank you, Councillor Barr, for your question. The point we were trying to make was that there are things which, as a local authority, we are just required, and I appreciate I'm speaking to a lawyer. There are things we are just required to do by statute. So it may seem like a statement of the obvious, but the level of service delivery may not be prescribed in law. So there's some variability there, and that will depend on local circumstance. But it will include anything which is regulatory, and that will include the legislation covering climate change and the carbon change.
Thank you. Yeah.
Welcome.
It was the reference to services I wasn't sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Collins-Stewart.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Ms Mackenzie, in 4.13 of the strategy itself, that's page 150 of our document packs, there's reference to reserves being maintained and built up. Are we talking here about earmarked or unearmarked reserves, or a combination of the both? And is the intent that this number would only increase?
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. So, first point, combination of the two, because there are earmarked reserves that the council can review and apply differently, if members choose to do so. And ultimately, it's up to elected members how reserves are applied. We have an improvement on our unallocated general reserves position coming out of our unaudited accounts. Hopefully, that will remain unchanged throughout the audit process. So there's an improvement there on the forecast position. But it's up to elected members on how to determine the use of reserves. The point I was making was that we need a managed and non-recurring use of reserves to address the level of challenge we have in balancing the budget, particularly over the next couple of years, because transformation and change will be an important part of the strategy mix, but it will take time to be up and running at scale, and it's scale we need. Does that help?
Thank you. So it's more about managing reserves rather than simply maintaining and building them up. It is about managing their use to smooth the level.
The core reference is about the management of reserves, yes. But if we start from an improved position, that will only be to the good in that process.
Thank you. I see no further questions, so I would now ask the Leader of the Council to move the report.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. Provost, just like our citizens who are dealing with the cost of living crisis, the Council is facing huge pressures too. Costs of providing the everyday services that the public rely on is increasing amidst unprecedented levels of inflation. Our energy costs are projected to almost double in the next year, and we don't yet know the impact of pay awards on both the current year and future years. When these external pressures are added to our structural deficit, we face huge financial challenges over the short and medium term. In order to deliver a balanced, sustainable budget, we're going to have to make tough decisions that will involve changing the way we do things, or indeed curtailing services. We also need to make sure that our resources are diverted to where they are most needed. Deputy Provost, I welcome this financial strategy. It sets out a number of core principles that will help both elected members and officers bring forward a sustainable revenue budget that meets our strategic objective. Importantly, it also sets out some very real steps that we can all take. As far as possible, we will reduce unnecessary expenditure and maximise income. By building up and prudently managing our reserves, we can manage the full introduction of budget reductions over the next few years. It is important to recognise that we are not the only public sector organisation facing these challenges. Many other organisations are facing similar tough choices. However, the approval of this financial strategy puts us in a better position to meet these challenges head on. At this point, I'd like to thank our finance teams for their continued good work and sage advice. I commend this paper to the Council.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'm not going to add much to what Councillor Ling has said, and we do have the 2 amendments to come in. But I think first of all is to recognise that as a council, we do need a balanced budget, a sustainable budget. We certainly can apply reserves, and indeed I think it's part of our strategy to smooth the situation over what is going to be a very challenging at least 1 to 2 years. I think I'd also point out that with the Scottish Government and with the recent resource spending review, the Scottish Government itself is actually under the devolved settlement. It has a little bit more leeway in terms of limited borrowing powers, but it too has to establish balanced budgets. And I think we've got to see it in the context also of the UK spending review from last autumn. And I think the thing to remember there was at that time, the headline rate of inflation was 4.2%. That is now more than doubled. Things really have changed fundamentally. And as Stuart Mackenzie pointed out, the figures today from the Office of National Statistics, 9.1% for May for Consumer Price Index, 11.7, and quite a surge there in Retail Price Index. So that really gives us challenges. The table that's set out on page 139, no way do I view these as firm predictions. They are estimates, and they're going to have to change as we go along over the next year. And I'm sure there will be quite a number of changes by the time of the medium-term financial plan and by later this year. I think the other thing I'd point out is the usual response by policy makers, and we're beginning to see it very much now. The higher inflation is higher interest rates, and it's not something to overlook. There's certain areas of council spending, for instance, in our investments, we actually might get quite a bit more now in terms of income. It may conceivably end up reducing the pension fund deficit, given the discount factor. We have to see on that. But certainly for borrowing from Public Works Loan Board, I think we're inevitably going to see higher rates going forward. The one thing we've got to bear in mind, however the pay awards go, whether inflation is transitory, the one real problem with inflation is it is in many ways a tax on the most vulnerable in society. In terms of those who are out of work, on benefits, if benefits are not uprated, especially for the elderly who are living far more on fixed income and who are far more possibly having to pay food and energy, and they have a choice in many cases between heating or eating, and it's a much higher proportion of their budget. So we as a council have to bear those in mind, and we did with the recent on financial inclusion, and we really are going to have to tend to that. But in any event, it's going to be difficult, but we've got to proceed. I think the next paper is going to be very important in that, just how we go about transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Can I go to the Head of Finance for a point of clarification? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost, and apologies to members. I didn't wish to interrupt the flow of debate. It was just simply to address Councillor Duff's question earlier, because I have that information to hand, or at least one of my colleagues has very kindly provided me that information. So the overall level of funding in the current year is around £12 billion, just under £12 billion, but that does include a significant amount of non-recurring COVID monies. So we are very much comparing apples and bananas. If you look at that £12 billion against the 10.6 figure in the table moving forward over the next few years. But that's the answer to the question, Councillor Duff. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I now ask Councillor Eric Drysdale to propose his amendment. I'm not sure if that is linked with Councillor Bailey's amendment. No, I'm getting a negative. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Yes, I just wanted to pick up on Councillor Stewart's incisive question to Mr. Mackenzie around 4.13 on the papers around reserves, and I would like to ask Leader of the Council if he would consider a slight tweak to the wording of 4.13 under reserves, which currently states maintain and build up reserves to smooth the level of budget cuts required in the first few years of the new council, to change maintain and build up to prudently manage. The reason I ask for that is in order to allow the council a degree of flexibility to implement any carefully considered spend to save measures and or emergency measures, including possible further support for relief of cost of living pressures faced by our most vulnerable residents and businesses. I believe I have a seconder for that amendment.
I'm happy to formally second that.
Am I right in hearing that's Councillor McEwen formally seconding? Thank you. Can I move now to Councillor Bailey for your amendment? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I fully support the recommendations in this paper, but I believe that we as a council must go further. The council decided to only set one-year revenue budgets in these past 2 years, and that has led to a fair degree of short-termism on the part of us councillors. Our short-termism has contributed in no small part to the £10 million structural deficit we now face. I therefore propose that we incorporate a commitment to setting 3-year revenue budgets into the financial strategy in the process of adopting and agreeing it today. Doing so will ensure that us councillors have to show the impact of our year one spending on future years. That is the only way to keep a political body like ours in check. Have us show the full impact of our decisions on future years. We shouldn't limit our ambitions at 3 years either, so the amendment is open to setting indicative budgets over longer periods where possible. Therefore, I move the amendment which you can see on the screen, and I'll read it for clarity and accessibility. Council resolves to note the contents of the report, agrees to insert an additional principle into the paragraph 3.4 to say that we will agree indicative budgets for a minimum of 2 further financial years when setting revenue budgets, and thirdly, agree the remainder of the financial strategy as outlined in Appendix 1. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Do you have a formal second? I see a seconding from Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'm very happy to second Councillor Bailey in this amendment. I think actually, according to the text on screen, it's point 12, but I think it would need to be point 13 in the financial strategy. After the first year of COVID, at the end of the first full year of COVID, it was understandable that the council would want to set a one-year budget given the uncertainties at that time. But we were promised that we would return to full multi-year budgeting the year after. We have done so. We did not do so in the last budget cycle. But when we had multi-year budgeting, at those times, we did not have certainty over future years' funding from the Scottish Government. Now that we have that, in order to prudently budget for the future, to manage our finances, and let's not forget that what we're talking about here is not just public finances, it is taxpayers' money. In order to manage that, in order to manage the transformation and change that will be needed to take this council forward and to minimise the burden to the taxpayer, it is necessary that we have multi-year budgets. Given the commitment that the Head of Finance made in his introductory remarks, I think that this is a useful additional principle to include in the financial strategy and the Committee Council.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Before we move on, can I ask the Leader of the Council if he's happy to accept either or both amendments into the motion? Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. Yeah, I'm very happy to accept Councillor Drysdale's amendment, and in my speech I actually used words prudently managing as well. I think it allows us as a council and elected members some flexibility where we want to save rather than tying us into merely building up and maintaining reserves. So I welcome that. Also welcome and we'd like to incorporate the second amendment as well. I think it's a prudent way. We always before done use these 3-year budget setting process, and I'm very happy to go back to it again. Thank you.
Thank you. I notice that there is a further amendment from Councillor Barrett, and so I'd wish to take that now. Councillor Barrett, Peter Barrett.
Thanks, convener, and my proposing a third amendment is in response to the Leader of the Council's acceptance of Councillor Drysdale's amendment, which I think is absolute folly, and that comes as the leader of the only group in the council who, in submitting their budget for the current year, actually made a contribution towards reserves, and I don't think that we should be swapping a clear a statement of policy intent for some weasel words about prudential management and wriggle room. I think we really have to face up to the serious nature of the financial challenges that face us, and we've heard from the Chief Executive during the briefings that we've received on the need to do precisely what it states in the first bullet point of 4.13, which was to maintain and to build up reserves. It wasn't to prudently manage them and put off the day where we need to build up those reserves to some time in the future. It was about action now and not in some time in the future. And I'm surprised that given the amount of commentary that the SNP group have provided on the need to take hard decisions, that the moment they're actually faced with having to do that, they want to kick it into the touch and the long grass. So I think that would be absolute folly to go down this course. I'm very happy to agree with Councillor Bailey's amendment for 3-year budgeting. That's eminently sensible to take a multi-year approach to this situation. I think paragraph 5.4 of the report spells out the dangers of the flat cash nature of the Scottish Government's resources to local government, and it's against a record of inflation and specific inflationary pressures on fuel, energy, construction materials and labour, and contract inflation that we've heard about during the course of questioning, and those are going to have a real and immediate impact upon Perth and Kinross Council and the communities that we represent. I think paragraph.
Councillor Barrett, can I ask you what the amendment actually is?
To move the strategy without Councillor Drysdale's amendment.
Okay, thank you. Do you wish to add any further comment to finish off?
No, I think having had my flow interrupted, Deputy Provost, I'll rest there.
Thank you. Can I ask if you have a seconder for your amendment?
I second the amendment.
Thank you. Okay, we have an amendment that from Councillor Barrett, seconded by Councillor Liz Barrett, that is in contrast to something in the motion. Before we move to any vote on that, there are comments outstanding, and I would like to call Councillor Rebeck. You have a comment.
Thanks very much, Deputy Convener and Councillor Carr. It was just a brief comment, not related to any amendments about the ring fence money. I think it's perfectly legitimate for democratically elected governments substantially elected democratically to try and fulfil their manifesto promises. And when local authorities are delivering those manifesto promises, it's perfectly credible and indeed welcome for Scottish Government to fund such promises. I think particularly in Perth and Kinross about early years childcare, which was delivered excellently by officers in Perth and Kinross Council, but was, I think, almost fully funded to the tune of £30 million plus by the Scottish Government. So it's worth noting that.
Thank you, Councillor Rebeck. I note that we have one more comment from Councillor Forbes. If any other members have comments, please put them in the chat. Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Deputy Provost. I couldn't resist the temptation to follow up on what Councillor Rebeck has just said about delivering on manifesto promises. I could run through a huge list of unfulfilled manifesto promises from the SNP Scottish Government, but I'll save us all the time because we all know what they are. But I do want to point out that back in 2018, when the good old Derek Mackay delivered the medium-term financial strategy for the Scottish Government, some of you may remember him. Kate Forbes admitted just the other week that there's £7 billion extra in the kitty since then. I don't see us getting any of that £7 billion. In fact, we are getting a flat cash settlement, which puts us completely at the mercy of inflation, and we all know what's happening with inflation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. I see two more comments from Councillors Duff and Illingworth, but before I move to them, Councillor Peter Barrett, you had a comment in earlier. Do you wish to take up that comment? Thank you.
Convener, no thanks. I'll maybe just rely on summing up for the amendment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Yeah, I think none of us will underestimate the scale of the financial challenges that are facing Perth and Kinross Council and the services that we deliver. Obviously, Mr Mackenzie has forecast a potential structural deficit of £24 million by the time of the next budget, and that's a deficit which may change and probably not for the better in the short term. I'm thankful to Mr Mackenzie for some clarification around about the Scottish Government's level of local government finance for this particular year. I appreciate that it is not a direct comparison, but I think I'd be fairly correct in saying that the flat cash settlement for the next 5 years going forward is a reduction on this year, and that, as we've heard from Councillor Forbes, the impact of inflation, etc., going forward will further affect us disproportionately, or put disproportionate pressure on this council and other councils across Scotland in terms of our service delivery. On that basis, I think it's very important that we have a strict hold or a control of the amount of reserves that we have as a council, and I will be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. This report makes for grim reading. We have an unestimated £24 million deficit for financial year 23-24. It is unrealistic to hope that the Scottish Government will be able to bail local government out, given that the SNP in Holyrood has clearly overreached itself with a long list of impossible to keep election promises. Kate Forbes' spending review statement on the 31st of May, which revealed a £3.5 billion black hole, is proof of that. It is also unrealistic to make up the difference by putting up council tax by up to 24%. This would impact the least well-off in our society and introduce council tax poverty to the long list of pressures on our citizens. Deputy Provost, this council will have to make many hard and unpopular decisions over the coming years. Those decisions will be made easier thanks to the responsible management of reserves by the previous Conservative administration. I am relieved to hear Councillor Lang's commitment to prudent use of reserves, given the budget amendment suggested in February by both the SNP and the Scottish Labour Indie Group, which both both propose spending all of the COVID reserve fund. To adopt any other policy other than prudence would be like a sea captain setting sail into a storm, having first sold the lifeboats on eBay. Thank you, Deputy Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth, for your metaphors, amongst other things. There being no more comment, can I ask Councillor Peter Barrett to summarise his amendment?
Thank you very much, Deputy Provost. Councillor Lang tried to suggest that everybody in the public sector was in the same boat as regards finances and the challenges that we face, and that's simply not true, because if you're in health or in social justice, then you're getting increases in funding over the time of the resource spending review. But if you're in local government, then you're getting real terms reductions, and you're getting real terms reductions to the tune of over 10%. So the Scottish Government is intent on addressing problems, but not in terms of preventing those problems occurring. And if you want to tackle child poverty and social justice, then what you need to do is invest in local councils and the economy to lift people out of poverty. But that's not what's happening. I think the resource spending review must be challenged and opposed by every council up and down the country. There is a mantra amongst SNP councillors that the resource spending review is a forecast and not a budget. And if we're to stop it becoming a budget, then that forecast needs to be opposed now. And I would urge the leader of this council to make sure and make urgent representations to make sure his party and government in Holyrood get that message about what the resource spending review actually means for Perth and Kinross, and the damaging impact that it will have on achieving the 4 key priorities of tackling child poverty, addressing the climate crisis, securing a stronger, fairer, greener economy, and delivering excellent public services, because these are all going to be in jeopardy if the Scottish Government continue in their existing path.
Thank you. And before I go to Mr. Hendry for the vote, I'd ask the Leader of the Council to sum up for the motion.
Thanks very much, Deputy Provost. I have to take slight issue with Councillor Illingworth's prudent handling of our structural deficit they handed over to us. I think that's why we're at 10.4 million, which is what has been left by the previous administration to us. So he made me want to reflect on that statement. As for weasel words, I'll not make any comment on it, but they're certainly not weasel words. I and everybody in here realises that we are facing massive problems with the structural deficit, and we will be making hard decisions, and we'll be making them together. The whole 40 of us will have to come together and decide how we're going to take this forward. But I accept Councillor Drysdale's amendment, because I think we have to have some room where we can make the decisions of where we want to spend and save, rather than being tied to an idea that gives us no movement or wriggle room or anything to make any decisions that we want to make. So I can't accept Councillor Barrett's points, so I'm happy to go with the motion with the 2 amendments that I've accepted. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I now ask Mr. Hendry to conduct the roll call vote for the motion and Councillor Barrett's amendment? Thank you.
Can everyone hear me okay? Thanks for bearing with us while we swap the microphones. So, councillors, we're dealing with item 8 on the agenda, a report by Head of Finance, the Financial Strategy, report number 22/141. We have a motion by Councillor Lang, seconded by Councillor Donaldson, We had an amendment from Councillor Drysdale, which has been incorporated into the motion, and an amendment from Councillor Bailey, which has been incorporated into the motion. We therefore now also have a single amendment from Councillor Peter Barrett, seconded by Councillor Liz Barrett, which is in line with the original motion, incorporating only the amendment from Councillor Bailey. So when I call out members' names, if they can confirm whether they're voting for the motion by Councillor Lane or the amendment by Councillor Peter Barrett. Bailey Ahern.
Amendment.
Councillor Allen. Councillor
Amendment.
Allen. I think that was the amendment. Councillor Allison, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson. I think you're on mute, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Anderson, if you could just try once more to unmute and then repeat it, please.
It's an amendment. It's got mute below the thing, but can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think you've voted for the amendment. Thank you. Bailey.
Motion.
Councillor Liz Barrett.
Amendment.
Councillor Peter Barrett.
Amendment.
Councillor Braun.
Amendment.
Bailey Brock.
Motion.
That was the motion. Councillor Carr.
Motion.
Councillor Chan.
Amendment.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Motion.
That was the motion. Councillor Donaldson.
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale.
Motion.
Councillor Duff.
Amendment.
Councillor Forbes.
Amendment.
Councillor Frampton.
Motion.
Councillor Freshwater. Councillor Freshwater. Are you able to post a vote in the chat? Would that be acceptable, Provost? Yeah. If you're able to post in the chat your voting intention. If you're not able to do it now, then we'll need to move on and simply record a no vote.
I think he's having trouble unmuting, I think, convener.
I'll wait for a short while longer.
Amendment.
Councillor
Freshwater.
Councillor Harvey.
Motion.
Councillor Illingworth. Councillor James.
Amendment.
Councillor Kogali.
Amendment.
Councillor Lang. The motion. Councillor Leishman.
Motion.
Councillor McPherson.
Motion.
Councillor Massey.
Motion.
Councillor McCall.
Motion.
Provost.
Motion.
Councillor McEwen.
Motion.
Bailey McLaren.
Amendment.
Deputy Provost.
Motion.
Councillor Rebeck.
Motion.
Councillor Reid.
Amendment.
Councillor Robertson.
Amendment.
Councillor Shires.
Amendment.
Councillor Smith.
Amendment.
Councillor Colin Stewart.
Motion.
Councillor Grant Stewart.
Motion.
Councillor Waters.
Motion.
Councillor Welsh.
Motion.
That was the motion, and Bailey Williamson. Deputy Provost, we have 22 votes for the motion and 18 votes for the amendment, so the motion is carried.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. Members, we now move on to item 9, Transformation and Change Strategy 2022 to 23 to 2027, 28. And I'm going to invite Claire Mailer, the Deputy Director of Communities, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Provost. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Provost and councillors. The Transformation and Change Strategy that Council has been asked to consider sets out an approach to develop and deliver a 5-year programme to reshape our organisation and the way we work with communities, partners and businesses across the area. The strategy sets out why we need to change, highlighting the significant challenges we face in relation to climate change and increasing demand for services, rising costs, and as we have just discussed, our very difficult financial situation, alongside the changing needs of our population. It highlights what we want to achieve through transformation by continuing to put people first and focusing on supporting people in the greatest need. The strategy also emphasises the importance of working with and within our communities to fully realise the ambitions of the Perth and Kinross offer. The strategy will sit within our wider strategic planning framework to support the delivery of our corporate objectives and outcomes, setting the strategic direction and ambitions for our organisation over the next 5 years. The revised corporate plan will set our vision and corporate objectives and priorities. A draft will come to Council in August with a final, following extensive consultation, we will bring a final corporate plan to Council in December. The Local Outcome Improvement Plan will come to Council later this year with a focus on the targeted actions that the Community Planning Partnership will take to focus on inequalities within our communities. The Perth and Kinross Offer Framework, already approved by Council, details the actions that we will take over the next 5 years to strengthen how we will work with our communities. And the financial strategy, as we have just discussed, details the financial challenges we face, the extent of the structural deficit and the measures we must take now and over the next 5 years to identify savings, reduce our budgets and support the Council's long-term financial sustainability. The financial strategy and the Transformation and Change Strategy will work in tandem. Due to the size and complexity of the organisation and the nature and extent of the challenges we face, the Transformation and Change programme will require a range of approaches. These are detailed on page 169 of your pack. The first approach, transforming our customers' experience, is about the things that we do will be different for those who receive our services. This is the true transformation, and we will focus on delivering the offer with communities at the heart of shaping, delivering and managing the services. The second approach will be about transforming the shape and structure of our organisation. We recognise that the shape and structure of the organisation needs to change. The programme will involve service restructure, elements of consolidation, but we will also need to consider the merits of other models of insourcing, outsourcing, sharing services and indeed commercialisation. We will also transform our systems and processes, and this activity will be led within services and by teams. These changes will deliver improvements in efficiency and productivity, and these improvements will be made possible by streamlining our processes and a greater use of digital solutions. And finally, and probably the most challenging of all, will be the transforming of our spending and response to demand, as Stuart has outlined, which will involve budget savings, reviewing demand across the organisation and focusing on need and indeed reallocating our resources where required. Aligned with our corporate objectives and priorities, the programme will be categorised into 3 key themes: people in place, partners and Perth and Kinross Council, which is our organisation. Projects will be developed with a clear scope, intended benefits and potential impacts, and all of this will be measured against an assessment criterion to ensure projects meet the aims of the overall programme. Elected members will be involved in the process through the normal governance mechanisms, and committee structures, with areas with any substantial spend being decided through Finance and Resources Committee and significant strategic decisions coming here to Council. We will also work with elected members through leaders and more widely to agree more informal engagement approaches. We will ensure that we have a sustainable approach to workforce development and a flexible and agile workforce with the right skills, values and attitudes to meet the demands of our communities now and into the future. With a continued focus on public service and a particular focus on those in greatest need, with the support of our teams, partners and communities, we will continue to ensure that the people of Perth and Kinross are at the heart of all that we do as we evolve to face the challenges ahead. Myself and the team here would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Deputy Director. Are there any questions from members in respect of this item? Not seeing any indications. Councillor Colin Stewart first, please.
Thank you, Provost. I'd like to refer to section 511 of the covering report. That's on page 157, and take that with final bullet point of 2.1 on the first page. That's on page 153 of our document pack. If the Chief Executive chairs a transformation board, so the transformation board will be purely made up of officers, and then update reports on the transformation and change strategy will be provided, but in the fourth bullet point of the recommendations 2.1, requests the Chief Executive to bring forward further reports to the Finance and Resources Committee on the implementation and delivery of the strategy. Is it possible that officers would take decisions to cut services without referring back to elected members for approval?
Claire Miller.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, elected members will be involved in the process, and I would absolutely stress that through the normal governance mechanisms that we have in place. So any areas where there is substantial spend or indeed savings, any substantial budget decisions will come through and be decided by elected members through the Finance and Resources Committee. And indeed any significant strategic decisions in relation to transformation and change proposals will come through Council. There may be some service decisions at a service level that will come through the normal service committees in the normal manner.
If I can come back in.
Immediate supplementary.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't think you heard. I don't think people online heard the question. Is it possible for any service cuts to be made without elected member approval? So, for example, we were talking in the last paper on the financial strategy about the savings proposals that elected members had rejected. Those included large items such as hundreds of thousands of pounds savings on closing recycling centres or reducing winter maintenance on the road networks. But they also included tiny amounts like funding for parent councils and relatively small amounts, funding for parent councils and primary school swimming lessons. Each year that officers brought forward those proposals for savings, elected members rejected them. Is there any scope for officers through the Transformation Board to implement savings cuts which elected members may choose not to agree with, and if presented with, would reject?
Claire Miller.
Thank you, Provost. I might bring Stuart Mackenzie in to support the answer to this question, but I must be clear that the usual budget process still applies. So the normal budget process that we always follow will continue. So that the short answer to your question is no, but Stuart, I don't know if you want to come in and say any more in relation to that.
Thank you, Claire. And no, there's nothing further I would add. The intention of a paper is not to circumvent in any way the normal budget process or decision making by elected members. All I would do is reference the size and scale of the challenge that Council faces and the debate that elected members just had over taking difficult decisions.
Thank you. Deputy Chief Executive is also going to come on.
Thank you, Provost. We are clear that the whole process will be transparent and that elected members will be making decisions.
Thank you. Councillor Stuart Donaldson.
Thank you, Provost. And can I thank Councillor Stewart, because it's really important going forward that the tough challenges we face, it is under democratic control, and it is seen to be under democratic control. What could I'd like to ask though, the question is on people in place, because I think this is an important work stream project about multidisciplinary locality working. Could I ask, I think probably Claire Mailer, how they envisage this working practice? Because I'm right in saying this is not just about council staff. It might involve police, as is the case in Crieff. It kind of links into the one public estate concept, but are other bodies, you know, are we looking to work with? And so we have kind of joined up responses to local needs. And what are we looking at in terms of definition of a locality? Is it just larger urban settlements across Perth and Kinross? Thank you.
Is Claire Mailer or Fiona Robertson taking Claire Mailer?
Thank you. In relation to multidisciplinary locality working, it very much is about services across the organisation, across the council, working together in a more cohesive way, but absolutely yes, with our community planning partners as well. We've already made good progress. You'll see that Fiona Robertson has put a comment there in terms of CPP partners. They have made a commitment within their local outcome improvement plan that will be coming to council later this year to have a real focus on tackling inequalities, but very much in a multidisciplinary way at that frontline community level. So work is underway in both Cooper Angus and Crieff at the moment through the CPP, but we also have wider work that is underway in a number of our localities at the moment. So very much at that kind of multidisciplinary involving all partners, bringing them together. We've had some good success. You will be aware of some of the work that we're undertaking in Latham already. Sheena Devlin and myself met with colleagues in Highland Perthshire, and there's some good multidisciplinary working involving health, police and wider colleagues across the council to really focus on some of the rural challenges that Highland Perthshire colleagues are facing round and about affordable housing and child poverty. And we had a successful workshop a couple of weeks ago with colleagues very much focusing on child poverty, and brought these colleagues together in a multidisciplinary across the community planning partnership and with council workers, again with that real focus on localities. So it was fairly detailed information within the offered framework about the approach that we're taking, and we will bring an update, a more detailed update to council and to committees in the future.
Thank you. Bailey Ahern.
Thank you very much, Provost. My question is based under the people in place. On page 178 is learning disability and autism. And it doesn't matter where I am, I keep trying to tell people autism is just a small part of the autistic spectrum disorder. And lo and behold, if you go 2 pages on and you start talking about young people, it actually describes it there as an autistic spectrum disorder. I just wonder if we could have some consistency when we're talking about autistic spectrum disorders. Limiting it to autism is not right for a lot of other people out there with those disabilities. Thank you.
Absolutely happy to do that, Bailey Ahern.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, councillors, and therefore I will go. Oh, Councillor Colin Stewart.
Thanks, Bob. Sorry, I was too busy reading something to type second question, and it was a short answer to Bailey Hearn's point. Just to follow up Councillor Donaldson's question on the people in place. Councillor Donaldson was asking, I think, about the multidisciplinary locality working teams on page 175 of our papers. A multidisciplinary locality working, bringing together members of different teams to work on a particular issue sounds like a great initiative. But there is a different way of doing multidisciplinary working, and I wonder whether this is also being considered, where, for example, one member of staff could be multi-skilled, so they could do multiple functions without needing multiple people on that multidisciplinary team.
Okay. Deputy Director, are you taking that?
Yes, thank you. And I think multidisciplinary, I would agree, means a range of things, and I would absolutely reassure you that the approach that you've described, whereby you might have that one officer who is a single point of contact that might actually undertake a number of areas of work, particularly at that very frontline interface. We very much are promoting through the employee offer experience the no wrong door approach, and very much encouraging staff across the organisation. And we've had sort of an overwhelmingly positive response to that for all staff members across the organisation to be the eyes and the ears and to accept and act upon any kind of queries that they're facing. We had some very good examples of the approach that you describe of single officers picking up a number of different areas for colleagues throughout the pandemic, and that is something that we absolutely want to build on. So just to give you a brief example, we had a social worker from Adult Social Work Services undertaking a visit to an individual dealing with the adult protection issue, the child protection issue, and the housing, covering the housing issue in the one visit, not necessarily picking all of the very difficult nature of it, but undertaking the face-to-face visit to avoid multiple visits to that particular property in that particular home. So absolutely, that is the approach that we will continue to build upon through the work that we're doing out with the staff in our communities.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Peter Barrett, please.
Thanks. I was wondering, given this week's announcement on the National Care Service Bill, what the likely disruptive impact that was likely to have on the transformation programmes for health and social care, given the massive transfers of assets and staff that are going to accompany the bill. It would seem likely to cause significant problems to making tangible progress with the transformations programme in that sector.
Okay, Jackie Pepper, I believe, is still with us. Jackie? If not, the Deputy Chief Executive will take the question.
Thank you, Provost. Jackie had apologised at an earlier point because she had to step out for another meeting. So if what I say is sort of can be built on, then Jackie will come back. The transformation programmes, we have been aware, sort of within the Health and Social Care Partnership may have to flex as a result of the National Care Service, but there is a introduction, but there is, sort of that opportunity as we move forward to 2026, when the National Care Service is likely to come into place. Then, sort of there is still work that can be done and should be done, and that the team are committed to doing.
Thanks very much, Provost. I have great pleasure in moving the Council's transformation and change strategy, developed to set out our planned approaches for ensuring we continue to deliver the best possible services that we can within the resources at our disposal to serve the people and communities of Perth and Kinross. In doing this, we recognise that our focus needs to be on ensuring that we concentrate on the services which make the biggest difference to those in the greatest need in our area. This will bring huge opportunities and energy to what we do as an organisation, allowing us to respond to the continually changing environment and context within which we work. We have new and emerging expectations and commitments to meet within social, economic, health and wellbeing needs and climate change. We want to embrace new and best practice in all areas, providing opportunities for our people and our services to improve. We are also faced with a substantial fiscal deficit, and reshaping our organisation to deliver a balanced budget now and in the future will become key in managing the financial demands placed upon us. Transformation and change is everyone's business, and it will mean different things in different service areas. So to achieve the level of savings required, everyone needs to be looking for ways to improve what they do, practically and or financially. This might be a small change, or it might be something more radical. In addition, COVID has added to the significant and increasingly complex challenges we face. The equalities gap and opportunities for those in need has only widened. Our local economy is still in recovery, and we're continuing to see the emerging long-term implications for people's physical and mental health and well-being. We are continuing to see increasing demands on us as a council and other public and community partners. However, we have also proved that there is a different way of working alongside our communities and partners during this time. Our Perth and Kinross offer is committed to strengthening our relationships with peoples and communities, ensuring they are at the heart of all we do. Change is necessary because our structural deficit means we cannot keep on doing everything we've done before. Change is necessary because our commitment to working with communities set out in the Perth and Kinross offers means we cannot simply offer a one-size-fits-all solution or continue to do things within communities without consultation anymore. What we need to do is changing. There are different social, economic, health and well-being and climate priorities ahead, and we need to review what, how and where we deliver services to meet these challenges. Our communities are changing. We have an increasingly older local population, and post-COVID, the demands for complex services and more digitalisation is growing. Financial challenges and drivers for change we face are not unique to Perth and Kinross, but they do present a compelling case for why the need for the Council to evolve and change is more pressing than ever. We will always remain committed to protecting our people and their needs as far as it is financially sustainable. Although the challenges we face are substantial, we have significant experience in delivering transformation and improvement projects, and we know from previous experience that a focused programme of transformational change can make a real impact on the way that we operate. Firstly, the success of our future transformation and change programme will be built on our biggest asset, our staff team. They will continue to show a commitment to serving the public and have stepped up and faced challenges and changes whilst continuing to deliver. I thank them for all their hard work, and we will support them as we move forward, tackling new demands and challenges as we meet them. Provost, I am happy to move this paper.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. To second. Thank you very much. Are there any comments on this paper? Councillor Colin Stewart first, please.
Is that better? Yeah. Thank you very much, Provost. I think I have to say that I very much welcome our transformation and change strategy going forward. There are lots of areas where the Council can make continual improvement to the delivery of its current services. That doesn't necessarily have to mean cuts, but there may be things that we do that we don't need to. But we can also look to areas where we can deliver more of the same service for the same amount of money, or we could deliver improved services for the same amount of money, the same amount of spend. But it does need to be backed up, as is noted, I think, by the Leader of the Council and the officers who've put this paper together, by a strategy which says we need to go and look at our processes. We need to maximise the resources and assets that we have available. And in addition as well to what the leader of the council said about one of the council's primary resources being, of course, its staff, I think actually one of the primary resources that is open to the council is the knowledge and experience that is that resides within our communities, who have so much expertise in various areas, not least the geographical expertise about where they live, but who have so many resources that the council can tap into and help co-design and deliver strategies. And certainly, I would encourage staff, any staff who are leading transformation or change programs, to reach out to that expertise that resides within our communities. I think the example that the Deputy Director of Communities gave in response to my question on multidisciplinary working and multi-skilled officers was a great example of how that can work. But there are other examples. I think there's a council, maybe Argyll and Bute or somewhere over on the west coast, where amenity officers undertake multiple functions out in the I presume the open space communities green space type function. So that might be another area that could be looked at through the strategy. The one area of concern that I had was the one that I brought out in my questions, which was about the possibility for service cuts being made, which elected members would not have approved or given it would not like, or as we represent our communities, or would not have given approval for. So I'm reassured by, I think, all of the answers that were given by the officers, including the Deputy Chief Executive and the Deputy Director of Communities, that that's not a thing that could happen, and that the normal budget processes will still apply. And so I don't feel the necessity to bring forward an amendment about that, because we have had those assurances made in the chamber, and I'm sure that the leader of the council will echo them as well. But a great paper and an exciting opportunities for the council going forward to deliver for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leishman.
The Perth and Kinross Labour Group appreciate the need we have as a council to undergo a transformational change. We know that the priority is our public's welfare and making sure that our people receive the services they not only need and rely on, but those services are of the standard that they deserve. A comprehensive approach to organisational transformation is likely to produce a lasting, successful change that will ultimately benefit our communities. The global landscape has changed dramatically over the last couple of years. A pandemic, a war in Europe, a climate emergency, and a cost of living crisis have all contributed to us needing to adapt how we work for the people of Perth and Kinross. We know that there are people in our communities that need assistance now, more than ever before. Every councillor here has residents that are living in dire circumstances. This council will have a difficult balancing act to perform, but with a combination of head and heart, key issues and problems must be tackled and solutions found. It's easy for party politics to get in the way, but we councillors need to concentrate on the real problems facing so many of our people and sow seeds of hope and recovery, and not division and despair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor John Duff.
Thank you. Thank you, Provost. Are you hearing that okay? Yes. Yes, evolution of our services and structures is always something which council should be considering, how we can improve services and cut costs. Given the financial climate we find ourselves in and have discussed at length today, delivery of transformation is now more necessary than ever before if we are to continue to deliver all of our statutory responsibilities and a range of additional services. I welcome the report and will confirm that the Conservative Group will play its full part in the transformation and change strategy going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. I'm not seeing any other indications of comments. Mr. Leader, do you wish to sum up at all?
No, happy just to move the paper.
Thank you very much. Members, are we content to agree the paper? Thank you very much. Members, we now move on to item 10, the update to the scheme of administrations. Members, on this item, I'm proposing that we defer the decision on the full revised scheme of administration until our council meeting on February the 17th of August due to the late arrival of the paper associated with this item. However, I am asking council to agree that the membership of all executive subcommittees be increased to 7 members, and for the provost subcommittee to be agreed to be comprised the deputy provost, the appointed bailies, and myself as provost to sit on the subcommittee of council in case these committees are required to meet over the summer recess. And finally, to agree the name change of Environment and Infrastructure Committee to Environment, Infrastructure and Economic Development Committee. Can we agree that the deferral of this subject to the agreement of those changes of subcommittee membership and the new name for the Environment and Infrastructure Committee? I see Councillor Forbes has a question.
Thanks, Provost. I'm curious as to why we saw this paper 24 hours before the meeting started.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. As I'm sure you will appreciate, the meeting was moved forward a week and officers have been working under significant pressure to ensure that all papers were ready. This was an item that was agreed by the council at the 25th of May meeting, and these were textual changes to take effect of that decision. And therefore other items were prioritised to get out that members hadn't seen in advance. However, the proposal is to consider this in full along with the other proposed changes that are due to be made to scheme of administration on the 17th of August. Are there any other points?
Thank you.
Can I make?
Yes, I've got a question from Councillor Barrett.
Yes, it's a follow-up to Councillor Forbes' question. A lot of this paper we did see before, or the leaders saw 10 days ago, but the bits that came out of the blue yesterday were actually the parts that you're proposing to push through today. Why are we not postponing the whole thing?
So, as proposed was that the subcommittee memberships would be agreed so that they could meet over the summer if there was a need for those subcommittees to meet. That is what is being proposed. It is proposed to raise all subcommittees to 7 members, exec subs to 7 members, and for the provost subcommittee to comprise the provost, deputy provost and 5 bailies, which has been intimated previously. And point of clarification from Councillor Peter Barrett.
Thanks, Provost. But I mean, surely any executive subcommittees could meet as they're currently composed if there's an urgent need for them to meet over the summer.
Well, they could, Councillor Barrett, but there would then need to be discussions between various groups as to who would actually be allowed to sit on those committees, as they are 5-member committees, and therefore there is not an automatic easy divide of 5 members. With 7 members, both Liberal Democrats and the Independents are entitled to 1 member each. On a 5-member, they would need to be split.
Right.
I have a question from Councillor Hearn.
Thank you very much. My question ties in. I was going to leave it until paper 11, but you just mentioned about council meeting on August the 17th. Why are we having a full council meeting just 3 days after the end of recess? Bearing in mind officers are going to be needing a holiday, there may not be every member available to read papers within the 7 days before that meeting. And traditionally it's been the last week of August. I just wonder why it is 3 days after the end of recess.
Thank you, Bailey Hearn. That is the next item. However, in answer to your question, that was agreed in the provisional timetable. Council agreed on the 25th of May, so Council has already agreed that meeting, and there is no hard fast agreed position of timing of the meeting in August. There has been, to my recollection, at least one special council in the previous term, which was in 2017, and I think it may have been at the end of August. But I can't remember the exact date, I'm afraid.
Last year's was at the end of August.
Okay, I'm quite happy to defer to you on that aspect. Are members content? Councillor Peter Barrett.
Yeah, I think in the interest of moving this along, Provost, I'm happy to I agree to it. But I would say that at the outset of this administration, we were told that it was going to be a new way of working and it was going to be an inclusive and collegiate way of working. And to be honest, I didn't expect that we'd be getting these last minute surprises, which we've now had in terms of creating Baileys at the last council meeting and in terms of the scheme of administration at this council meeting. And we were also told that we would get advanced sight of pre-agenda papers. That hasn't happened to date. So I think if we're going to agree with this in the interest of moving things along today, then we actually need to see some tangible proof that the collegiate and early notice way of working is what's going to happen in the future. And I'd be grateful for your undertaking and the leader of the council's undertaking that that's what's going to happen from now on.
Thank you, Councillor Peter Barrett. As Councillor Liz Barrett pointed out earlier, leaders did have advance sight of the papers in advance of them being issued to the public. So I do believe, and that, as you're aware, was issued the first working day after the administration and myself as Provost received those papers. So I think it would have been quite hard for them to be received much earlier than they were, as it was within several working hours of them being issued to ourselves. The Leader of the Council wishes to make a comment, and I'm sure he will happily provide further undertaking on this matter. And my point on your first matter, the proposal for deferring it is very much as a request of opposition groups to allow more time to consider the paper. So we are trying to work in a collegiate manner. Leader of the Council.
Are we live? Yes, can you? I'd just like to give assurance to Councillor Barrett and others that yes, we will be giving sight of papers when we can. The reason that the papers are not coming forward today was that when they did come out, I felt it was too short notice for the opposition parties to have seen these papers, and I'll take some of the responsibility for that. It's taken us longer than we anticipated. There's been a lot of meetings going on to sort out all the remits for the various committees, because we have made quite a few changes to the committee structure, and so it's not just been adopting what we've always had before with minor changes. So I don't think this is down to officers in any large part, but probably down to the changing of the remits and the other changes that we're incorporating into the scheme of administration. So I'll take responsibility for that if that helps. But I thought we were doing the right thing by pulling the paper when Councillor Duff and others asked for us to do it, because it was a shortage of time to see it. So hope everybody can accept that, because that's the truth of the matter how this happened. Thank you.
Councillor Liz Barrett.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you to the Leader of the Council for that undertaking. I know myself, as Vice Convener of Climate Change and Sustainability, I only saw the terms of reference in that format for the first time 24 hours ago. So other parts of the paper have been substantially changed since the draft that we saw some 10 days ago. But it still goes back to my question about the additional points. The Provost has talked about the composition of the Provost Subcommittee. It's also part of the scheme of administration that should be moved from its position in the scheme at the moment, and I'm still at a loss to understand why this is suddenly being put through urgently when the rest of the paper is being postponed.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. The proposal is so that the subcommittees can have their new membership and meet with that new membership over the summer. Provost Subcommittee previously sat as a subcommittee of SP&R, which now currently sits under Finance and Resources. However, not all Baileys, which have been appointed by the Council, sit on Finance and Resources. So therefore, the proposal is to make it a subcommittee of Council, which sits more appropriately with the new proposed division of responsibilities. The proposal today is simply to defer the paper, subject to agreeing that all executive subcommittees will be 7 members, with the Provost Subcommittee becoming Subcommittee of Council, with the Provost, Deputy Provost and the 5 Baileys being the membership of that committee, not proposing to change the remits of any committees. However, we are being asked to change the name of the Environment and Infrastructure Committee. So that is the total of the changes that are being proposed today, and the proposal is that all other changes, of which there are due to be more anyway, come forward on the 17th of August. I'm not seeing any other indications of members wishing to speak. Therefore, is the Council agreed on this matter? Thank you. Item 11, timetable of committee meetings 2022. Can the Council agree the proposed timetable of meetings for the remainder of the year? Councillor Ahern.
Thank you, Provost. I notice once again we have council meeting in December on the week before the Christmas break. When that's happened in the past, we've nearly always had to move it back to the week before that. For various reasons, whether it was when we had the meals after the full council or whatever, but it was always moved forward, back a week to the week before that. And I just wonder why we put it once again at the week before Christmas.
I'm not particularly aware of it being regularly moved, and it's certainly not my intention to move it this year, so I'm quite happy to give an undertaking. It is my intention as Provost that that meeting will take place on the proposed date. I have no other further information in regard to that item other than require that number of Wednesdays and Mondays to put a committee timetable. I can't provide any further detail. However, I will give that undertaking that I look forward to seeing you all here the week before Christmas. So I have a question from Councillor Liz Barrett.
Yes, I'm surprised to see there's only one Learning and Families Committee meeting scheduled. Unless I'm missing something, please tell me if I am. On the 24th of August, I can't see anything after that, although there are 2 meetings of the other key committees as far as I can see. Could that be checked, please?
I think that has been missed, Councillor Barrett. I think it was perhaps supposed to be on. There's a missing. I think we will give an undertaking that that committee has actually been missed. Councillor Barrett is a very good spot, and there will be a time agreed for that with the convener of that committee. And we will email all members if that is acceptable.
Thank you. It might just be worth double checking on everything else as well, perhaps.
We will give that undertaking. Thank you, Councillor Liz Barrett. Can the Council agree to the committee timetable subject to that provision around Learning and Families meeting and double checking all other items? Thank you very much. Council is asked to agree appointments to committees and outside bodies as were issued on the agenda. I'm not aware of anything extra other than the ones that are on the agenda. So the items, the appointments that are on the agenda and those that were emailed to members yesterday, is the Council agreed on those appointments? Thank you very much.